Hello and welcome. My name is Vicky Wishay. This is A Wealthy Life, and this episode is going to be quite off topic, not property investing, I suppose a touch of mindset. And of course, money will come up in here somewhere. I'm sure it will. But it's something that's been whirling through my mind, and I think it's worth discussing. And I'd love your thoughts on it. I'd love to have an actual conversation with you about it because I'd like to grow my knowledge and understanding. But the nature of a podcast is there's me speaking and you listening, but that doesn't mean to say that I wouldn't welcome and love your feedback. And this is going to be one of two episodes. And I think if I look at what I've just recorded for you, that it's really talking about stereotypes. And I'm going to talk about men next week. But I think through this concept of a stereotype, once you've listened to this, and even if you're a man, don't just skip to next week's. Please listen to this because there will be women in your life. And I'd love to look at how you think conditioning has played a part in your lives. So by the end of these two episodes, we'll be able to have the conversation between all of us. But for now, looking specifically at conditioning in women. So are you conditioning your daughters? Were you conditioned as a daughter? How are you treated in the workplace as a woman? And how do you feel you're treated in society? Listen to some of the language that is used and sometimes think about the history of that word. You know, to bewitch someone is to put them under your spell. And we might think that's all very cute when you've seen that. I think it's probably like 1950s, 1960s program Bewitched, where, you know, Tabitha twiggled her nose and did funny things. But actually, to bewitch someone, to put a spell on them, is actually a death sentence for you as a woman, or very rarely, but as a man. So thinking about language and conditioning, this is not rampant feminism, although I can see how that's become necessary. It's just a conversation to lift the veil and question our thoughts, our behaviors, and in turn get that to shed a light on your values. So I spoke to you last week about downloading the values manual. We'll put that again in the show notes for this episode. But when you go through your own values, how many of your values are actually from the inside out, something that you want rather than something that you feel that you need to have because of something else? And I suppose a couple of the words I would use here are valued and appreciated. As human beings, shouldn't we all feel valued and appreciated anyway? Why do we need that as a value? And a lot of women will have that in their values lists. I don't hear that so much from men. And is that because women don't feel valued and appreciated? And if so, why? And so I suppose that's, if you take it the other way around, that's another part of this conversation. Why is it that some women don't feel valued and appreciated, and where might that have come from? And then adding that question into, I suppose, my love of history, then that's where this would all come around. So I hope you enjoy this episode. I would love to have a conversation with you about it. I would love to have your feedback and to have your thoughts. So over to you. Enjoy. Do you ever suddenly start noticing something that was there all along and you hardly noticed it, and now you can't stop seeing it? So, for example, a yellow car. Sometimes it's something so obvious, it's almost as if you've stuck a pair of glasses on and things have come into light for you. So for me, it's always history, I suppose. History is a set of lenses that I view things through, looking at what's gone on in the past and using that to think about the future, because history teaches us lessons. It explains where we've come from, but you can see lessons in the adversity and, of course, in achievement. And I do believe that if you really listen to history, it can help us see the future and plan accordingly. But by bringing together this idea that we often see something that's there all the time, but we don't really notice it. And then suddenly it comes into view. That for me, with the love of history that I have, so aware of how women have been treated in history. And I think if you know anything about me, you'll know that I have this passionate love affair with Hampton Court Palace in Surrey. It's the home of Henry VIII and Anne Boleyn for a while. And if you listen to the history books, how they spoke of her almost as a manipulative harlot, how, you know, one minute she's this young girl and, you know, she's about to be queen and everything is wonderful. And the next minute she's having a head chopped off and accused of treason. So there is this thing in history where, and I'm not exactly sure whereabouts it started, but where women are a position, they become this political pawn. And when I look at the women that I've always been fascinated, and this is literally back from a teenager, and I can't say that it ever came up in my history classes at school, can't remember exactly how it came about. There must have been some TV program. Oh, you know what? It's probably Elizabeth Taylor's fault. Think it was maybe a film, a Hollywood movie. Maybe it was Cleopatra. Maybe it was, you know, something like that, Caesar and Cleopatra, one of those things. Cleopatra, because I remember being fascinated by Cleopatra as a queen of Egypt. And then later on, looking at Elizabeth I as sort of the first great female monarch of her time. And, you know, how we had the Armada and all the great, I don't know, changes or steps forward that we had in history under her rule. And then, of course, we come to Victoria, who was treated very differently. He was very closeted. And really, although Victoria was the queen, Albert was the power behind the throne. So looking at all of those characters, I think all of that history has led me to look at these things. And recently I watched a program by Suran Jones, who's an amazing actress and screenwriter. Started off in Coronation Street, which is quite a shock, not a program I've ever watched, but I know her, I think, originally from Dr. Foster and Vigil, Scott and Bailey, and more recently, Gentleman Jack. And she's just completed a program called Investigating the Witch Trials, which covers both the English and the American famous witch trials from Salem and the trials up in the north in the UK. And looking at this idea that women today are still suppressed because of the history of this, looking at on a historical level, historical level, looking at the hysteria and the manipulation and the control and even the extreme prejudice, religious prejudice that was all behind the witch trials, and how they have rippled down into history with still a not in modern days still, but still there was that fear, even after the witch trials ended, that women might be accused of being a witch. And while we look at those times as being thankfully long gone, although, as she points out in her program, there are religious rumblings in the States, there often are. So when times are challenging, frequently what happens if you are ultra religious and things are challenging, you will look for something other than God to explain why things are going wrong. And of course, that would be the devil. And therefore, there are witches in league with the devil. And so it goes there. So there's still this legacy of female suppression. And as you know, sort of since the end of 2023, I've been working with a lot of female clients. Time and time again, I hear the following sentences. This is just an example of one of the statements that are made. I didn't ask for a pay rise. And of course, my reply is, why not? And there'll be this embarrassed shoulder shrug. I didn't want to embarrass them, of course, but I'll ask why. And the answer is something like, my boss would have said no, or my boss wouldn't have supported me. I think the worst one I heard is that my boss wouldn't have supported me, but my boss is a woman, and the woman boss wouldn't have supported a woman employee and supported her claim for a pay rise that is backed up by the value in the work that she's doing and the hours that she's doing, because it was hard for her to come through the ranks as a woman. So why shouldn't it be hard for those women below her, which is a very odd set of thinking. Now, this is something I never hear from a male client. They would have asked for a rise with the expectation that A, they deserved it, and B, that they would get it. And yet so many women I meet and speak to assume that they are not valued or that they won't be valued. And frankly, it's true. And that's where this concept of historical conditioning comes in place. That said, I'm also meeting a lot of women who are choosing to live different lives. They're choosing to be single, or maybe to not have children. They want to be engineers. They want to be scientists. Yes, they're younger. There's quite, I can't quite put my finger on it. And maybe that's what's triggered some of this thinking, but I don't know what the answer is yet. Do they know something from social media? Or are they the new wave of young people that have been conditioned differently because of their parents' expectation? Are they breaking the mold? Or is it just posts on social media changing the way that people think about things? I don't know. I don't know. But I do think they're thinking differently from the original caricature of what a woman should be. And that's interesting, because I'd like to understand why and how. But you know one thing? They still don't have a grip on their finances. Some will tell a family story of, maybe they were broke when they were younger, or maybe they had money and then they lost money, or maybe they had money. All three versions will have their own story that lead down to a set of beliefs about money. Some will have emulated their mothers, and some will actually know about money, but still choose to abdicate that responsibility to their partners. So what do all these women have in common? I still believe it's the way we're brought up. This is no blame on our parents, because with all good intentions, parents will either try to protect us or to help us, but unintentionally doing the opposite. Our parents will have passed on their beliefs. And this is true for men as well, although the men will have been getting a different set of beliefs through the father line. The father and the mother influencing the daughters shape, back to this word, the values, shape your beliefs, and your beliefs shape your values. They shape the essence of who you are. And in a lot of families, money is never discussed at home because it's impolite. And if you think back through history again, how is money impolite? If you look at it back through the ages and you take it back to 100 years ago, it's because talking about money and business would have been considered too taxing for the delicate mental state of women, because they couldn't cope with hearing such complicated notions. Women back 100 years ago who asked questions were considered troubling, often troublesome, and were sent to mental institutions. It's this, I suppose, manipulation of women throughout history, that is so interesting in how it's manifesting in us now. Everything else is moving forward at an enormous speed. If you think back, I mean, goodness, I can remember literally in the space of my lifetime, let me go, in the space of, is it 30 years? Oh God, do tell me it's not 40 years. How old am I now? No, it must only be about 30 years. We had the introduction of the internet. We didn't have phones that could take photos, never mind that could connect to this worldwide web of knowledge in the palm of our hands. There were these clunky great lumps of computers that you switched on and that made whirling noises, and You had to know how to put commands at something called a dot prompt. And here we are taking all of this for granted. But also, if it's been 30 years, there are women that are now in their mid-20s to early 30s that will have known nothing different to this. And so while all of their lives are built on a different level of foundation, mine was built on encyclopedias, theirs are now built on everything on the internet. I had to learn maths by doing sums on a piece of paper, using the plus sign and the minus sign and drawing a line under it and carrying the one for adding up and taking away. And now you just use the calculator, whether it's a calculator or whether it's your phone. There's exponential change in our knowledge that has an impact on society. Everything is changing except these stereotypes. And that's why I want to talk about men next week as well. If you go back again, way back in history, even before the time of Cleopatra, Roman women owned their own businesses. Think about Boudica, or some call them Boadicea, the Celtic queen. She led a country in a revolution against an invading Roman army. Where are the women that had that much self-belief that they could do that? Yes, there are women business owners now, but we only have to look at The Apprentice and look at the way things are manipulated, and it will be a manipulation. But the first thing they always do is they put the women in a group and they put the men in a group, and the men, they might have an argument, but they pick a leader and they get behind them. Yes, there's some power plays, more and more of that these days, political shenanigans going on in the background so that they can sneak up and take over. But in a sense, that is almost nature's way. There is a leader, and then there are always others that want to be the leader to take over. Look at what the women do. They invariably destroy one another. Now, we can see changes in history. You can see, let's call it women's liberation, for example, through clothing. So you go back to the bodice of, the last century, or the century before rather, tying us in place. And then you move through to the 1960s where you've got the miniskirts. But in all honesty, that's just an external dressing if we're still assuming that we're not valued. If we still don't understand those difficult concepts like maths and money. If we're still giving our daughters baby dolls to play with and our sons train sets. If that's still going on, then it's only a surface change. It's not a change in terms of our core beliefs and values. And that's why, again, I'll offer you the values manual so that you can start working through things. So what can we do differently? You can look at your values and your beliefs. You can look at whether they're supporting you. And if not, how can you either take on values that are more supportive or let go of values that are not supportive? And this is definitely, as I've said to you before, something that I spend a lot of time working with some of my clients to achieve, because without getting that alignment of your values to what you want to achieve in your life, you're going to be held back. If you still think that you're not valued and appreciated, you're not going to ask for a pay rise. You're not going to ask for a promotion. You're not going to set up, whether you want to call it a side hustle, which I think is derogatory, or a second business that will give you financial resilience and a second stream of income so that you are better able to make decisions about your life. There are some women out there that I'm working with now that have money coming into a relationship, and instead of creating a property portfolio with their husbands and pooling their money, they're aware of the fact that they have more money than their partners, and they're choosing to create their own property investment portfolios and keep that money separate because they understand that they need to be able to provide for themselves before they can be in a position where they can be part of a relationship and go on and have children and know that they have that security in the background, that they can still support themselves no matter what. Underlying there is still this idea that we're not completely equal, and were things to go wrong, there wouldn't be an equality coming out the other end. We can break out of this thinking. We can change the way that we think. And this is not about knocking men. It doesn't have to be that at all. And in fact, if you listen next week, you'll see that it's very definitely not that. But it's about being clear on what's important to you as a woman. And I will say, if you're still listening to this as a man, what's important to you as a man? And we'll talk about that next week. Can you make better, more conscious decisions on how you want to live your life, what a wealthy life might look like for you? And then can you spend that time doing what you love with those that you care about, because you understand your wealth, you understand your value, you understand how money works, and therefore can make a plan to achieve anything that you set your mind to? That, I think, is the question. Are your values holding you back? Are you being suppressed through historical notions that absolutely do not apply now? They didn't apply then. They definitely don't apply now. And if you can recognize them, you can let them go. And if you can let them go, then you can achieve anything you set your mind to. And that does not have to include the suppression of others, whether it's other women or other men, because you can move forward in your own life, and you can set a trail path and others can follow. You can clear the way and others can follow. It doesn't have to be that you push people out the way. It doesn't have to be that you push people down. We can just, I suppose, be nicer to one another. Yeah, maybe that's the way to end. Let's just be nicer to one another. I hope you've enjoyed this. It's a bit different. Next week's going to be a bit different as well. If you're a woman listening to this, I would really encourage you to listen to next week, because I think you're going to find the flip review really interesting. And I hope that if you're a man and you've found this interesting, you'll let me know your thoughts. Please listen next week as well. So please share with me your thoughts. I hope that I have been able to put a different whoosh into your thinking this week, that I might get you over just the next couple of weeks to start looking, to put on that pair of glasses and think about, is this real, or is this some historical notion, some stereotype that I'm playing into, and how can I break out of that and move forward in the life that I want to live? Look at what's going on in your life. Maybe make a note, maybe send me a message. I'd love to hear. So thank you very much for listening, and please tune in next week. Thank you very much for listening. And as with episode 126, I'd really like to share with you the values manual that I use with a lot of my clients. You'll be able to download this and work through it in your own time. If you find that too challenging or you get stuck, then please do book a call. It will be absolutely fine. I'd love to help you if I can. So download the values manual, work through the exercises as described in the book, and then look at what's supporting you and what's not supporting you. And if you're a woman, particularly notice whether those words have come up from you. Now, I might have planted them a little bit through this podcast, but what I'd like to say to you is forget that I have planted them and just do your own values exercise out of your own thoughts and not any hints that I've put in your way. So please, as always, follow along, subscribe, do leave a review and let me know your thoughts. I'd love to hear them. Thank you very much.